Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast of EU PV changes to PSURs and strategies for benefit risk analysis. I'm Lisa Henderson, Editor-in-Chief of Applied Clinical Trials magazine, and I'll be your host today. This webinar is presented by Applied Clinical Trials and sponsored by MAPI. MAPI is a leading global organization offering evaluation and support of therapeutic strategies. With offices worldwide, MAPI provides high-quality and efficient operations to help its clients secure product approvals and reimbursement, as well as addressing post-marketing requirements and late-phase needs, meeting the needs of patients, physicians, regulatory authorities, and healthcare technology purchasers. We have some important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, therefore we do appreciate your participation. You can interact with the speakers during the Q&A session by simply typing your questions in the Submit Question box located below the viewing window. You can enlarge the slide window at any time by clicking on the Enlarge Slides button located below the presentation window, and the slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If you are experiencing technical problems with viewing or hearing this product, please click on the Help button below the viewing window. Leading off today's discussion is Dr. Hemendra Mishra, Senior Director of Product Risk Management. Dr. Mishra is a pharmacovigilance physician with 17 years of international work experience. Dr. Mishra's medical practice includes positions at hospitals in India and with Doctors Without Borders. He gained public health experience as a consultant for a WHO anti-malaria program in India, the STB SARS containment team in Singapore, as well as working for the Health Promotion Board in Singapore. Dr. Mishra has 9 years of experience in both pharma and the CRO industry globally. His roles include medical monitor, drug safety physician, as well as a safety and risk management expert. In his last employment, Dr. Mishra took a lead commercial and organizational role in the development of safety and risk management services for both new and existing pharmaceutical company clients. At MAPI, he is Senior Director of Product Risk Management, and in addition to tasks he performed as a global drug safety physician, he is also responsible for the authorship of European risk management plans and helping clients comply with the new EU pharmacovigilance legislation through his expert knowledge on the optimal design and conduct of internal pharmacovigilance processes. Our second speaker is Dr. William C. Mayer, Chief Scientific Officer and Vice President, Epidemiology and Risk Management at MAPI. Dr. Mayer has over 20 years of experience in drug development and commercialization at pharmaceutical companies in Europe and the United States. He was previously Senior Director of Epidemiology at GlaxoSmithKline and Elan Pharmaceuticals and led research groups conducting observational research using registries, databases, chart reviews, and field research to support reimbursement, marketing, and drug safety investigations of pharmaceuticals throughout the world. He was head of respiratory epidemiology at GSK and was instrumental in the conduct and publication of several studies describing the epidemiology of COPD and the impact of therapy on COPD mortality and exacerbations. He has worked on over 100 observational studies in several disease areas, including respiratory, neurology, psychiatry, autoimmune, cancer, endocrinology, cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, urology, opioid dependence, and vaccines. Dr. Mayer routinely provides training seminars to pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical products companies in Europe and the U.S. on the use of development of real-life data for use in health technology assessments, drug safety, and risk management. So thank you both, doctors, for joining us today, and we will start with Dr. Mishra.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. As you can see on the agenda, we start with looking at the new PSUR and its requirements. Then we go into the challenges for preparing the new PSUR. And then my colleague, Dr. William Mayer, will present on the strategies for presenting the benefit risk part. We end up with a summary, and then we'll take questions. To start with the first part of this presentation, the new PSUR and its requirements. We start with the definition. Periodic Safety Update Reports, or PSURs, or sometimes loosely called PSURs, are pharmacovigilance documents intended to provide an evaluation of the risk-benefit balance of a medicinal product. They are prepared by marketing authorization holders at defined time points once the product is authorized. Compared to the old PSUR, the new PSUR focuses on summary information, scientific safety assessment, and integrated benefit risk evaluation. The new format is similar to the current Development Safety Update Report, or the DSUR format, and is also linked to the EU RMP. As we all know, the PSUR is modeled on the ICH E2C R2 guideline, which talks about the Periodic Benefit Risk Evaluation Report, or the PBERS. In Europe, there is a legal basis for the new PSUR, and that's in the form of regulations and directives. To give you a background, regulations are the most direct form of EU law, which means as soon as they are passed, they have binding legal force throughout every member state, and they are on a par with national laws. Regulations are different from directives, which are addressed to national authorities, who must then take action to make them part of national law. Regarding GVP modules, or Good Pharmacovigilance Practices modules of the EMA, they are a set of measures drawn up to facilitate the performance of pharmacovigilance in the European Union. So for the guidance on the scope, objectives, format, and content of the PSUR, there is a GPP module, which is Module 7, which gives us enough guidance to prepare this report. Looking at the structure of the new PSUR, we see there are some sections which are exactly the same as compared to the old PSUR. Some sections are similar, but there is a change in scope, and some sections are absolutely new. The text which is highlighted in red are the major changes, and I would like to talk about that. Let's look at Section 6. In the new PSUR, there is a focus on summary tabulations rather than individual analysis of cases. So we don't need to have a detailed analysis of individual case safety reports, and in consequence, we do not have routine line listings attached as appendices. This is a major change. Still looking at the structure, the new sections, which are 15 to 18, which talks about overview of signals, signal and risk evaluation, benefit evaluation, and an integrated benefit risk analysis. These are absolutely new sections which require additional data, additional work, additional reviews, and have been given additional timelines for the preparation. So once we look at the key changes to the PSUR, we see there is a change in the objective. It has moved. The old PSUR was a report focused on safety. The new PSUR has a role which is more on to benefit risk assessments. The format has changed. It is now more modeled on the ICH E2C guideline and is similar to the DSUR. As we have seen, there are new sections, so the content of the report has changed. And we briefly talked about timelines. So additional timelines have been given for the preparation of this report because it is more comprehensive and more complex. There are new sections on benefit risk evaluation, new sections on safety signals, no routine line listings are required, and there is a certain category of products where no routine PSURs are required. A PSUR may be required when there is a safety concern and the regulators ask for it. Otherwise, these category of products do not require routine PSURs. These are the generic medicinal products, well-established use medicinal products, homeopathy, and herbal medicinal products. When we talk about well-established use medicinal products, these are products which have been in medicinal use within the community for at least 10 years with recognized efficacy and an acceptable level of safety. We also would talk about in the next few slides on the changes to the operational aspects of the submission of PSURs. We'll first have a look at the potential sources of information for the new PSUR. As we may remember, the new PSUR focuses on efficacy information, effectiveness information, as well as safety information. So there is a range of potential sources starting from non-clinical studies, spontaneous reports, active surveillance systems, product quality complaints, product usage data and drug utilization information, clinical trials, observation studies including registries, patient support programs, systemic reviews and meta-analysis, and the next one is new, which is the marketing authorization holders sponsored websites. Then we have published scientific literature as a source of information. Unpublished manuscripts is similar to what is required in the DSUR. Then there's another new source of information, which is information received from licensing partners, other sponsors, or academic institutions and research networks. Then we may also receive some information from the competent authorities worldwide. A list of the sources of information used to prepare the PSUR can be provided as an appendix. The extent of the information provided may vary where justified according to what is accessible to the marketing authorization holder. There are two major changes to the new PSUR. One is benefit risk assessment. The other is about safety signals. I would leave the benefit risk assessments, which Will is going to talk about in the later slides. I'll just talk briefly about the safety signals part. The new PSUR requires marketing authorization holders to have an overview of signals, to follow them and close them, and to take necessary actions depending on their analysis, and to present this in the PSURs. So for example, if you look at this example which was given in the guidance document, we have a signal term, date it was discovered, date it got resolved, how the source was detected, what actions were taken, and if the signal was confirmed, what follow-up actions were done. So this is kind of an example of an overview of signals which a marketing authorization holder can prepare, keep, and present in the PSUR. Just a couple of thoughts on safety signals. A signal should be included once it has undergone the initial screening or clarification step, and a determination is made to conduct further evaluation by the marketing authorization holder. Signals may be qualitative, example being an individual case safety report, or signals may be quantitative, which is a disproportionality score. It should be noted that a safety signal is not synonymous with a statistic of disproportionate reporting. When we are dealing with a statistic of disproportionate reporting, we should call it a signal of disproportionate reporting. And signals of disproportionate reporting needs to have medical confirmation before they get classified as a potential signal. Consequently, for signal evaluation, not only do we need to have the scientific evaluation of the currently available information, but there has to be medical judgment on it. Slide 15, safety signal evaluation. This is an example of the structuring of an evaluation given in the guidance document. So we can start talking about the source of the signal or the trigger of the signal, then present the background relevant to the evaluation, which talks about the product, the indication, the areas of concern. Moving on to the methods of evaluation, which will include data sources, and analytical approaches. We need to clarify what MIDRA terms we have looked at, what SMQs we have reviewed, and present that. Then the totality of the results or the totality of the data needs to be analyzed critically and followed up with a discussion and a conclusion. A signal may be confirmed or it may be refuted based on this evaluation and appropriately communicated in the PSUR as an ongoing or a closed signal. Moving on to some operational aspects, we first talk about a concept which is the EU single assessment. The single assessment of PSURs is a deliverable of the 2010 pharmacovigilance legislation of the European Union. It aims to harmonize and strengthen the safety and benefit risk review of medicines across the European Economic Area, which means regulators receive the same kind and same amount of information and at the same time. And it is easier for the industry to prepare a single document to submit to regulators at defined times. So the advantages, as you can see, it increases the shared use of resources between competent authorities in member states, and also it provides a mechanism for evaluating the totality of available data. The EU single assessment is the assessment of PSURs for medicinal products subject to different marketing authorizations containing the same active substance or the same combination of active substances, irrespective of whether it is held by the same marketing authorization holder or not, and for which the frequency and dates of submission of PSUR have been harmonized in the list of EU reference dates. So we talked about the EU reference date. Let's look at the definition. This corresponds to the date of the first or the earliest known date of the marketing authorization in the Union of a medicinal product. The list which contains the EU reference dates is known as the EU reference dates list or the EURD list. This is a list of active substances and combination of active substances for which PSUR shall be submitted in accordance with the EU reference dates and frequencies. There are a couple of committees which have determined the EU reference dates and frequencies. A little bit about the background of the committees. The European Medicines Agency, or the EMA, has 7 scientific committees that carry out the evaluation of applications submitted by the pharmaceutical companies and provide scientific opinions on matters related to the medicinal products that could impact public health. PRAC, otherwise known as the Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee, is the newest committee at the moment. The CHMP, or the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, plays a key role in the authorization of medicines in the EU via the centralized procedure and in protecting public health. The Coordination Group for Mutual Recognition and Decentralized Procedures, HUMAN, otherwise known as CMDH, this is responsible for the examination of any question relating to the marketing authorization of a medicinal product in 2 or more European member states, in accordance with mutual recognition procedure or the decentralized procedure. So these committees determine on a risk-based monitoring which PSURs need to be submitted at what time and at what frequency. The EURD list is available on the web portal of the EMA. Frequency of the PSUR. The marketing authorization holder is required to submit PSURs once a product is authorized in the European Union, even if it is not marketed. So when you're part of the marketing authorization holder, you need to first have a look at the EMA's website at the EU reference date list, whether the product or their product is listed there and at what frequencies and what data log points it needs to be submitted. If the product is not in the EURD list, the marketing authorization holder should continue to submit PSURs according to the condition in the marketing authorization. If no condition is specified in the marketing authorization holder, in the marketing authorization document, they should submit PSURs according to the standard submission cycle, which is immediately upon request, at least 6 monthly after authorization and until the placing on the market, at least 6 monthly for the first 2 years after being placed on the market, annually for the subsequent 2 years, thereafter at 3 yearly intervals. The EURD list is binding from data log points as of 1st April 2013. Timelines for submission. As we have seen, it's a complex report which requires more data and additional reviews. Marketing authorization holders should submit the PSURs within 70 or 90 days. We are talking about calendar days here from the data log point. When the PSUR covers intervals up to 12 months, the PSUR needs to be prepared and submitted within 70 calendar days of the data log point. When the PSURs cover intervals in excess of 12 months, then you are given 90 calendar days to prepare and submit the PSUR. For ad hoc requests for ad hoc PSURs, 90 calendar days are given to prepare and submit the PSUR. The additional timelines provided are due to the increased complexity of the PSUR. The European Medicines Agency, let's talk about the PSUR repository. The background is that the European Medicines Agency, in collaboration with the competent authorities in member states and the European Commission, will set up and maintain a repository for PSURs and the corresponding assessment reports, so they are fully and permanently accessible to European Commission, the competent authorities in member states, the PRAC, and the other committees. But before, the PSUR repository is currently a work in progress, so there are interim arrangements at the moment for the submission of PSURs. So before the agency's PSURs repository comes into play, the marketing authorization holders shall submit the PSURs to all competent authorities in member states in which the medicinal products are authorized. If it's subject to a single assessment, the PSURs also need to be sent to the agency, and these requirements are published in the agency's website. Once the PSUR repository is functional and 12 months later, the marketing authorization holders shall submit the PSURs electronically to the agency. That will be the e-PSURs. That's based on the ICH E2C format, and that will be submitted automatically via an electronic gateway. Slide 21, evaluation of the PSUR. There are certain timelines to it. So we start with day 0, which is the start of the procedure according to the published timetable. This is going to be published in the EMS website. At day 60, the PRAC's rapporteur's preliminary assessment report will be done. At day 90, the marketing authorization holder and the other PRAC members' comments will be received. By day 105, the PRAC rapporteur's updated assessment report will be released. At day 120, the PRAC recommended adoption with the final PRAC assessment report is done. By day 134, the CHMP or the CMDH positions are released. The actions further are, once the PSUR opinions are received from the CHMP or CMDH as applicable, the competent authorities in member states or the European Commission for centrally authorized products, they shall take the necessary measures to vary, suspend, or revoke the marketing authorization in accordance with the outcome of the assessment. The outcome of the PSUR assessment results in a legally binding decision or position. Transparency. Publication of PSUR-related documents on the European Medicines and National Medicines web portals. This is again part of the pharmacovigilance legislation of 2010. This is currently a work in progress. At this point in time, the list of EU reference dates and frequency of submission of PSURs are available, but later on we will have the final assessment conclusions of the adopted assessment reports, the PRAC recommendations, the CMDH positions, CHMP opinions, and the European Commission decisions will be available. Quality management system. Marketing authorization holders should have in place structures and processes for the preparation, quality control, review, and submission of PSURs, including follow-up during and after the assessment. These structures and processes should be described by means of written policies and procedures in the marketing authorization holder's quality system. So quality system procedures and procedures are necessary for the update of product information once the PSUR safety findings have been released to the regulators and it has been assessed, and any follow-up action regarding update of product information that needs to be done, there should be a quality system process for it. The marketing authorization holder should check regularly the list of EU reference dates and frequency of submission to ensure compliance with PSUR reporting requirements. There should also be systems for the scheduling the production of PSURs as per regulatory requirements. When a certain medicinal product does not have a risk management plan, the marketing authorization holder should maintain on file a specification of important identified risks, important potential risks, and important missing information. This is necessary to support the preparation of the PSURs. The marketing authorization holder should also have procedures in place for the submission of PSURs, and the QPPV shall be responsible, the QPPV, which is the qualified person in pharmacovigilance, which is a legal entity in the European Union. He or she shall be responsible for the establishment and maintenance of the pharmacovigilance system. When the preparation of the PSUR is delegated to third parties, explicit procedures and detailed agreements should exist between the marketing authorization holder and third parties. We move on to the next section of the presentation, which talks about the challenges in preparing the PSUR. The new PSUR is a more comprehensive document than the old PSUR. More work to prepare and more work to review. There needs to be critical evaluation of the results and all data sources. It appears there will be an increased role for medical affairs group and the outcomes group in a marketing authorization holder. A steep learning curve is expected with new processes, procedures, and documentation. Perhaps highly trained physicians and scientists will be required for writing these documents, safety physicians, medical affairs physicians, benefit risk scientists. Since this is a new document, a creation of a new process for producing the report is necessary, and it should be based on the additional data required from different stakeholders. There is a new template to be familiarized with, and the electronic submissions where processes need to be in place to cater to that. Resource management is a critical issue here. Training is an integral part of it. But before that, the concerned departments where the data needs to come from, or the departments where need to be involved for the production of the PSUR, they need to be identified. The relevant personnel within these departments need to be identified, and they need to be trained, irrespective whether it's internally or externally trained. For maintaining compliance, there should be adequate documentation of the processes, systems, and training records. And there should also be audits which check for compliance. When we talk about training, training should cover legislation, guidelines, scientific evaluation, and written procedures related to the PSUR process. Training records should demonstrate that the relevant training was delivered prior to performing PSUR-related activities. There should also be training to update knowledge and skills as necessary. Project management skills are extremely critical here, besides the scientific evaluation aspects. Normally for these kind of reports, there are coordination challenges. Multiple interactions are anticipated, so people skills are necessary. And as we have seen in many a time, there are people who are always resistant to any change. So there should be a clear identification of roles, responsibilities, timelines for gathering the data required. There should be a clear leadership, early planning of what PSURs are required. There should be availability of personnel besides identification and training of this personnel. There should be timely contribution by the stakeholders. It is advised to engage the reviewers as early in the PSUR production process. There may be times when there are peak workloads and the personnel are not available. And there should be appropriate oversight when one considers outsourcing. For close collaboration, there has to be commitment by different stakeholders, regular communication, and there has to be an agreement on the conclusions. All these specific issues could pose a challenge to the production and submission of a good PSUR. Signal management process. Marketing authorization holders would need to create a signal detection process and a signal validation process. It needs to be documented, and it should be a compliant process, and the IT system should also be in compliance with requirements and regulations. As we have seen in the past many a time, there is always a backlog of signals to be monitored or to be followed up. With the legal requirement, there should be timely follow-up of signals irrespective of time and resource constraints. These need to be followed up and documented and communicated in the PSUR. So there may be training needs for people, not only for signal detection, but also for signal validation. And there should be clear ownership when we talk about an overview of signals, the number of signals, what are the ongoing signals, what are the closed signals, what follow-up action has been done. All this information needs to be kept up to date not only for PSUR submissions, but also for audits. Looking at benefit risk methodology, there are no globally accepted standards yet. This is a new requirement for the PSUR. There is a wide variation which exists in the industry at the moment. Whether we should do qualitative or quantitative assessment, it needs to be seen. We also need to keep in mind that the risk-benefit balance is specific to an indication and population. Therefore, for products authorized for more than one indication, risk-benefit balances should be evaluated and presented by each indication individually. If there are important differences in the risk-benefit balance amongst populations within an indication, the benefit-risk evaluation should be presented by population. With this, I'll hand over to my colleague, Dr. William Meyer, for the third part of the presentation. Over to you, Will.
Thank you very much, Mindra. So I'm going to be talking today about strategies for presenting the benefit risk analysis. And Mindra has been going over the regulations in very great detail to help you understand that things have changed quite a lot relative to the old format of the PSUR. Unfortunately, what's happened is that there isn't a lot of extra guidance on exactly how to do this benefit risk analysis. If you go to the Good Pharmacovigilance Guidance document that's put out by the EMA, you will see that there is a definition of a risk-benefit or benefit-risk balance, which is an evaluation of the positive therapeutic effects of the medicinal product in relation to the risks. Now, one of the big issues here is that these risks are often taken in context relative to other therapies that exist as alternatives, and also the disease itself. So risks that would be acceptable for certain types of therapeutics for diseases that have a potentially fatal outcome would not be acceptable in the context of a disease that had no fatal outcomes whatsoever. So there's a variety of different ways you have to think about trading off risk and benefit here. It's not just what your drug potentially causes relative to other drugs. It's what the disease itself causes. This is something that's further complicated when you think about it from a vaccine perspective, where there could be risks related to the vaccine, but there could also be the risks of not vaccinating. So we have at the moment many different problems associated with low vaccination levels in certain countries, like we have a whooping cough epidemic or pertussis epidemic in France, or we've had measles epidemics right now in the United Kingdom, and this happens in the U.S. and a variety of other places as well. So we have a variety of different benefit-risk trade-offs that have to be made. In general, the standard is something related to a method that has been sort of developed a while ago by the ICH committee. So in other words, let's look at what they say in the GBP module here. Provide a clear explanation of the methodology and reasoning used to develop the benefit-risk evaluation. So the assumptions, consideration, and judgment or weighting that support the conclusions of the benefit-risk evaluation should be clear. If a formal quantitative or semi-quantitative assessment is provided, a summary of methods should be included. It says economic considerations or cost effectiveness should not be included in the benefit-risk evaluation. So I said that the GBP guidance document is heavily influenced by ICHE2, and this is sort of the benefit-risk assessment method. Now, it's more detailed than this, and you can look in the actual guidance document for greater detail, but we're trying to give you kind of a summary of where we see the key elements are. So the key benefits and risks should be considered in the evaluation. The context of use of the medicinal product. So that context could be the disease it's going to be used for, the setting in which it's going to be used for, the subgroup of the patient population, some of whom may be much more severe than the total patient population with a specific disease. It could be used for acute care, or it could be used for chronic care. So all these things matter in the context of the benefit-risk evaluation. In terms of benefit, consider the nature, the clinical importance, the duration, and generalizability. In other words, so how broad would these benefits potentially apply in relation to the data that you have or the knowledge you have, as well as evidence in efficacy in non-responders to the therapies and alternative treatments. And alternative treatments could be both medicinal treatments and it could be surgery in some cases. Of course, there could also be a strong case in many areas for doing nothing, and that could potentially be an alternative therapy as well. That may seem strange, but oftentimes, watchful waiting or doing nothing is a big part of medical practice. Risk. So same kind of thing, except now think about the relative clinical importance of these different risks. How toxic is it? Is it serious? How frequent? What are some of the risk factors? Is there anything having to do with preventability, reversibility? Can you treat these risks? In other words, are they, they might be serious, but if there's a lot of therapy that can be used to treat those risk factors, that changes the benefit risk, not risk factors, but the actual negative effects of your therapy. If you can treat them, that changes the benefit-risk balance and pushes it more toward the positive end of things. That's reversibility, potentially. Impact on patients and whether it arose from off-label use, a new use, or misuse. So this is sort of thinking about, in many cases, a post-marketing kind of setting risk assessment. What you're being asked for is something that's kind of a general benefit-risk assessment, and there could be new things that come up that have altered the benefit-risk balance. So what's the next aspect of this? Well, the strengths, weakness, and uncertainties of the evidence should be considered when formulating the benefit-risk evaluation. This is often going to be a big problem for anybody doing these if you've done them before. You never have completely comparable information across all drugs that you might be interested in looking at. You might have to weigh the relative benefits of your therapy, which look at affecting certain types of benefits, against other drugs which don't have exactly the same benefits and probably don't have the same mechanism of action or same risks. And then you need to explain the methodology and the reasoning used to develop the benefit-risk evaluation. Think about the feasibility of expressing benefits and risks in such a way as to facilitate their comparison. Now, if a formal quantitative benefit-risk assessment is provided, a summary of the method should be included. This is actually sort of essentially what we've already said. So you can sort of see the influence here of ICH-E2. And if you're familiar with the International Committee of Harmonization, ICH, it's kind of a collaborative group, multinational, U.S., Europe, other parts of Japan, other parts of the world, under the SIOMS process. To take a step back in time, here is something that I did when I was working at GlaxoSmithKline about 10 years ago. And what we were doing at that point in time was trying to take the ICH guidelines or the SIOM guidelines around benefit risk assessment methodology and try to think about how we would incorporate them into the drug development process. And I highlight this to you here because although the PSURs are, post-marketing, right, there is also the DSUR, which is the Development Safety Update Report, which has a little bit of a benefit risk assessment in it. And a lot of people are probably going to start thinking about, throughout the life cycle of the development program, looking at ongoing benefit risk assessment. That's what we decided to do at GlaxoSmithKline a long time ago because we kind of came to the conclusion that if you were going to do risk management planning, right, what risks were you going to have to mitigate after the drug was launched, you couldn't really just look at risk because it was kind of, there was never going to be a tolerable level of risk. It was always going to be in relation to the benefit that the drug gave. And certainly since then, when I've been working with clients and I've been working with people looking to help to get drugs approved, we always see that, does the drug work? How well does it work? What are the risks that we trade off against how much benefit we get? So you're always going to be thinking about benefit in the context of a risk management plan. And does mitigating the risks, i.e. lessening them or reducing the frequency of them, somehow improve the balance? In this case, you can start to think about this, and a lot of this information that I'm highlighting here on the disease, on the benefits and the risks, this is stuff you know pretty early on, and you can start to put it together. Even if you're putting it together late, like after the drug is launched for a marketed product or something like that, a lot of the same information, it all kind of goes together. So what do you know about the disease? How well do you know about population comorbidities? What about the actual use population? How's that different from what you saw in the trials? What do you know about preclinical, clinical, and so on? So there's a lot of information that gets accumulated over the life cycle of a product, and that all goes into the building of these benefit risk assessments. Now, this is something that the EMA has been thinking a lot about, and I did work with the EMA in 2009. We put together at DIA a presentation on quantitative benefit risk methodology, and one of the things that they talked about was all the work that they've been doing on trying to figure out how to do benefit risk assessment and communication. And I think what you'll see, this is kind of a complicated slide, but what you'll see is they've spent a lot of effort with a variety of different work packages. That's the way the EMA works. They get together work teams and stuff like that. And they've kind of looked at a whole lot of different things and they've looked at, what do they need? What are some of the methods? How would you put the things together? But one area that they hadn't really solved by then was kind of, well, okay, we can look at benefits and risks and weigh them against each other qualitatively, but we want something that kind of gives us a weighted approach. How do we do that? So in 2010, they published a little bit of work here about Work Package 2. Again, I told you that's how they work. And they got together a bunch of experts, internal, external to the EMA, and they looked at different qualitative methods. So that means just taking and writing, like a written document and saying, well, on balance, this looks more beneficial than it does risky. So that's qualitative. And I'll show you a little bit about qualitative methodologies. And then quantitative approaches. And then looking at ways of quantifying effects and uncertainties. So, when you're starting to look at quantitative methodologies, it's like a model, right? It's a model where you take and you weigh out different parameters, and then you try to figure out how much confidence you have in those parameters and look to see how much uncertainty would influence the outcome of your model. It's kind of modeling. And then, what else can they do, right? What other kind of methods are there? So one of the methods here, and there's quite a lot of different methods that they went through, one of the ones that sort of emerged as one of the front runners here, and you'll see it a lot now, is something called multi-criteria decision analysis. And it's a way of modeling benefit-risk trade-offs. And the reason it's particularly useful in this context is that it allows you to put both the benefits and the risks. You don't have to worry so much about the actual outcome. You more worry about like kind of where you see them in the spectrum of data that could affect the actual balance. And I'll give you a couple of examples so you kind of help make that a bit more concrete here. So I said I would mention a qualitative approach, and qualitative benefit risk assessment is something that is what you kind of inherently do. You weigh a series of benefits against a series of risks. When you're driving a car, when you're flying on an airplane, when you're eating food, whatever that has a certain taste or smell. You do this all the time. And this is just a way of taking some of that decision-making process and writing it down on a piece of paper. So you do a literature review, and then you kind of structured literature review. You pull all the information together, and then you try to make some assessment in that way. Now, this could incorporate something called meta-analysis. It might or it might not. There are a couple of big, frameworks in terms of qualitative benefit risk assessment that are starting to become quite prominent. The PhRMA one, the PROACT one, and PROACT is something that we see some in the U.S. and some here as well in Europe. The reason I mention this one is because it's pretty similar to the one that the SIAM's WHO method had described. It's kind of a framework that says, what are we looking at here in terms of the issue? What are the objectives that we want to decide in terms of this issue? What are some of the alternatives? What's the uncertainty? And so on. So this is kind of a qualitative way of weighing benefits and risks against each other. So you have to distinguish from a literature review which summarizes benefits and summarizes risks, and get down to the way in which you're actually going to weigh the two against each other, right? Because it's pretty easy to put together a summary of work, but you can put together a summary of benefits and a summary of risks, and you can even put them together in the context of some sort of meta-analysis where you extract event rates and stuff like that. But ultimately, if you're going to weigh them against each other, you run up against the issue of the benefits often are different in terms of the actual outcome than the risks. And so you kind of weigh them qualitatively, and this is one of the ways you can do that. Now, I wanted to go into quantitative benefit risk methods because, again, we're going to see this more and more. And I have a feeling that we're going to see more and more multi-criteria decision analysis in the context of regulatory benefit risk decision-making in terms of products and how they get marketed and how they get staying on the market. Okay? So this is a well-documented methodology. It sort of looks at different criteria in terms of decision-making. The MEA did a little thought piece on this. They looked at, I guess they did a project with somebody at the London School of Economics. I think that was it. That's where these come from. And what they did is they wanted to look and see if they did this multi-criteria decision analysis benefit risk assessment, how could they do that in the context of a day 80 assessment report? What would they have learned? And then if they redid it, using post-marketing data, would they have come up with the same conclusion? So the case study that they used was Acomplia, which was approved for obesity and overweight patients in 2006, and then its marketing authorization was withdrawn in light of post-approval data on the risk of psychiatric adverse experiences. So again, because it's a webinar, we can't go into it in its most detail, but this is basically looking at the different benefits and risks, and what they do is they look to see first of all, you derive a framework, i.e. what are all the benefits that you think that the interventions have and what are all the risks. Then you look to see what the event rates are, and then you try to plot them in such a way that you can sort of see, the strength of that evidence. You plot them against these little things here, So what you'll end up having is a weighted framework and some evidence that sort of says, well, where do I fit along a line? It's kind of a simple way of thinking about it. But what this means is that you have to think about the weights that you would give one risk and one benefit relative to each other. But what it means is that ultimately you'll have a framework, and you'll also have the ability to compare benefits and risks together once you figure this out. So what they found, looking at the early data, was that, yes, it looks like Acomphia or rimonabant was better than placebo for weight loss. It had slightly worse side effects. Okay, so that's what they could extrapolate from the public. That was similar to the public assessment, and you can see that there is, there is if you look at the results in relation to weighting, there's a substantial increase in the weight on a favorable effect that would be required for the placebo to be at most slightly preferable. So in other words, you'd have to kind of really you'd have to really increase the weight on unfavorable effects for placebo over the active drug. Okay. So then when they started to look at this in terms of new psychiatric side effects, what they found was that if you said, well, if in the post-marketing setting we subsequently learned, as we did, that the drug wasn't as good at reducing weight as we thought, but had higher side effect rates than we thought, then using the same model, you'd come up with a different conclusion. Okay? So where you can see the thinking starting to go here from a regulatory perspective is to say, okay, well, we're going to have some data at the time of submission. If we take that, then we can start to play around with different types of scenarios that could happen in a post-marketing setting, and we can see if we would like that or not, right? So if they say, well, what's interesting here is that they gave us data that said this, but we know clinical trial data isn't always as representative of the real world as we wish it was, both in terms of the magnitude of efficacy and also the magnitude of safety. If we were to change those, would that threshold of benefit-risk trade-off still be acceptable to us or not? Well, in this case, it appears that it might not be. And so this was sort of, a case example, right? The drug had already been taken off the market, so it was trying to kind of relive this to see if this tool could have been helpful at all. So in a sense, it was, okay? It helped them to articulate the reasoning that might have been used in the decision-making process more clearly, but in a post-hoc setting. So this tells you a lot about the potential value of this tool in a regulatory decision-making process. It also has the potential to be useful in a PSUR assessment process as well, where you have a routine product that gets updated, and then something changes. If it doesn't change, then you're not really redoing a lot. But if something changes, then, there could be an opportunity here to say something different about this drug. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, I don't work for a regulatory agency, so I'll just let them tell me what the story is. But that era has passed. That's not an era that you live in anymore. You're much better off to be proactive, to say, this is what we think. We think this is really our margin for tolerability here, and this is what we're willing to do to keep it in the tolerability area. That could be restricting the indication. It could be doing things. It's not just doing more data and waiting to see what happens. You're going to have to be activists now. And this is especially true given that we know in Europe and also in the United States, the amount of money that's available for buying drugs and continuing to pay for high-value, high-price new drugs is declining somewhat. Certainly in Europe it's declining. In the United States it may have flattened out. So we definitely have some issues here in the marketplace, and companies who are trying to launch new products have to be pretty active in showing where the value is, but also knowing themselves before the regulatory agencies know. So this is just another way of kind of saying that it looks like it will enhance transparency. So I'm just going to summarize the benefit-risk side here. It definitely is, this kind of benefit-risk trade-off is becoming a greater part of both the regulatory requirement process in the U.S., in Europe, and in Japan. There's a lot of similarity in terms of quantitative approaches. But MCDA, this multi-criteria decision analysis, looks to be kind of emerging as a front runner in terms of the new tools for doing this at the regulatory level. So it's useful for companies to think about incorporating this as part of their strategy for meeting some of the requirements in the PSUR as well. So I'm going to pass back over to Hemendra to finalize. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. So in summary, as we have seen, there has been a paradigm shift in the new format and content of the PSUR. This is legally required in the European Union from January 2013. This new PSUR is also acceptable in the other ICH regions, US and Japan. The sections on signal detection and benefit risk analysis present new challenges for the preparation of the PSUR. New stakeholders need to be identified, additional data needs to be collected, and there is going to be an extensive review done. We also need to keep in mind that a quality management system needs to be in place by the marketing authorization holder. In talking about benefit risk, if a formal quantitative or semi-quantitative assessment of benefit risk is provided, a summary of the methods should be included. The assumptions, considerations, and judgment or weighing that support the conclusions of the benefit risk evaluation should be clearly presented in the new PSUR. With that, this is the end of the presentation, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your informative presentations. We are going to begin the Q&A portion of the presentation, and before we answer some of the questions, I'd like to note that due to time constraints, our speakers may not be able to respond to all the questions submitted. But having said that, Dr. Mishra, we have a question. Is there a published list of signals, or does each company create their own signals list?
At the moment, the EMA has published the first list of active substances, where a lead member state has been appointed to monitor data in ultravigilance. So that is part of the signal detection process and work sharing process by the EMA. But currently, the marketing authorization holders need to get the signal detection or signal identification system up and running for all their products. And they need to communicate via the PSURs to the regulators. So yes, there is a list of active substances. It's on the EMS website, but it talks about substances which are actively monitored, and there is a particular country which has taken the lead to monitor that particular substance.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Dr. Meyer, how do these requirements change for applications to medical devices?
Will, can I take that question?
Oh.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, this registration is focused on medicinal products. So in Europe, the medical device regulations are governed under a separate set of rules. These are the MedDev rules, or the medical device legislation. So this legislation or these rules, what we talked about, is applicable to medicinal products and not medical devices.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the clarification. And how about, do they apply to combination products?
Again, the question is, in Europe, for example, the combination product needs to be first identified. If it's a medicinal product plus a medical device, the mechanism of action needs to be determined. If the majority or the main mechanism of action is via the medicinal product, then these legislation apply. If the main mechanism of action is via the medical device, then the medical device regulations apply.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more question. Dr. Meyer, what type of new information is being required as part of the new PSUR?
Right. Well, basically, the big change is the benefit assessment in relation to the drug. And so this is starting to think more about the clinical efficacy and effectiveness of this drug, and beginning to also look not only in what the information would be in the clinical trial setting, but also if you have any evidence of post-marketing efficacy. This is also starting to be part of the PSUR as well. And so this is something that needs to be weighed in the context of the benefit risk assessment. And what this will mean is that although there's always been a little bit of this, it's becoming a much stronger element in terms of the decision-making process around the value of the drug and and the value of the PSUR that gets turned in. So, and that's something that's kind of being pushed to the companies a little bit more, well, a lot more actively than would have been done in the past. So this means that different people need to become involved who may not have been as involved as they were previously. People in the clinical development process, people who sort of are the owners of the benefit risk profile of the drug in the company. How do they see it? Maybe people who have to think about the disease context more carefully, because of course that could make a big difference in terms of how you present the benefit risk analysis. So these are, it's probably some of the same people, but they might have to have slightly different roles as well. So there's new data and new people to talk about it. And that's going to be a change for some companies that they're going to have to adapt to.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank the audience for their interesting questions and our speakers for their interesting questions and the speakers for their exciting presentations. We will respond directly to the questions that weren't asked after the webcast. This webcast will be available for on-demand viewing through May of 2014. You will receive an email from Applied Clinical Trials alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay. Please invite your colleagues who may have missed this live event by forwarding them the announcement. And thanks again for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.